Welcome back to this interesting podcast on the Diplomacy Next. I am Maharaj Bhatt, and I am being joined by Dr. Qamar, who is an authentic voice and a reliable voice on the state of affairs that's happening in the Middle East itself. I have to invite him on this podcast. The reason being, for the students and for the researchers who want to know more about what's happening actually in Middle East and where this all started. This podcast was supposed to be conducted 2 days before, but having some personal issues, I couldn't. So sorry for the inconvenience. We are back, and I'm being joined by Dr. Kamar. Welcome back to this podcast, sir.
Thank you, Mehraj. I'm happy to be back.
It has always been insightful and fascinating to have you. And then again, the crystal clear analysis that you make, and we can rely on you as somebody who is a researcher, and also the audience that we have got over the time. They are too much interested to know and too much curious to know about what's happening in Middle East. Let's start from the day first. When Israel was taken by surprise by the attack and the massive attack that it saw on the mainland, and we can possibly have to look into the factors that contributed to this. And everybody, whosoever was watching television and whosoever was keeping a track of the news, things just happened in such a surprising way that no everybody was initially clueless that how is it possible the surveillance system, the state that Israel is, and the sophisticated technology that it has, and having its boots on the ground, and also having a very large network of its intel. Where did it all start? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, it is very, very important to analyze the events right from the beginning in the sense that beginning of the ongoing war. So it is absolutely correct that Hamas took Israel by surprise. And attack of such a scale must have been in the planning for a long time. Any such attack would take, even by whether by a military or by a non-state actor, a militant organization, it would take a long planning and preparation, which means that is Hamas was preparing for this attack for a long time, and given the intelligence effectiveness of Israel thus far, this was a very, very big surprise. Israel was taken by a surprise. It did take almost, a few hours for Israel Defense Forces and the government of Israel to react. So the initial reaction itself took some time to start, which clearly shows that it was taken by a surprise, and this much has been now admitted in public by the National Security Advisor of Israel, that this was an intelligence failure as far as the IDF and the security establishment in Israel was or is concerned. Now the point is that that's why this has been compared to the 1973 war, the October War in 1973. Incidentally, that war started on 6th of October and this one on 7th of October. The only difference being that at that time it was Egypt and Syria which had mounted a surprise attack on Israel. This time it is a non-state actor, Hamas. But that's why, I mean, the intelligence failure of this extent has led to confusion. Now let's see why did Hamas did whatever it did. What I mean, first of all, the point being that whether it can be considered a attack by two warring parties, two conflicting parties, which means that both are in an ongoing conflict, and this is an attack. Just like, for example, what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, two countries or two parties are fighting and they are attacking each other. So should it be considered almost identical to that, or is there any scope for a difference in terms of understanding it? So my understanding is that despite of the fact that Israel and Palestine are at loggerheads and in a conflict for a long time since the establishment of Israel, and the conflict actually predates the establishment of Israel, and Hamas being in control of Gaza Strip since 2006-7, and they have Israel and Hamas have fought, several wars, and there have been intermittent clashes, and all that has happened over the years. And Israel has been accusing Hamas of being a terrorist organization. It is recognized as such by several countries: United States, United Kingdom, many of the European countries, and other countries as well. So, in that scenario, if one looks at it, this was certainly a terrorist attack. Why? Because Hamas did not only target any only military establishment. It targeted civilians. It targeted people's home. It targeted, unarmed people who were maybe, indulging in some kind of entertainment, or being at home and all that. The other aspect of it is the moral aspect. And although there is not much scope for morality in a state of war or in politics, one has to also understand that Saturday being Shabbat, which is a Jewish holiday, and people usually are involved in rituals, religious rituals, and religious activities. So attacking people uh, while they are engaged in religious activities, it's like attacking a mosque when people have gathered for Friday prayer. So the nature of the attack, the timing of the attack, all of this leads to a situation where there is no scope for Hamas to say that it is a attack in resistance. Rather, it should be considered as a terrorist attack. Hamas can justify its resistance on the basis of continued Israeli occupation of Gaza and West Bank, and as representative of the Palestinian organization, but that does not in any way, justify any kind of terrorist activities. Just like if Israel is a state, it if it indulges in any kind of war crime while in combat, if its soldiers indulges in any kind of such activities, that also has been condemned by the global community. So, in that sense, the condemnation of Hamas terrorist attack has to be unequivocal.
So, for the audience, there are two things that we want to look into. Is a the domestic politics of Israel, where we see competing forces, contesting for making the government, be that the opposition, be that Benjamin Netanyahu. Number one. Number two is the modern warfare that most of the analysts would be interested to look at. The Hamas surprise attack was, it took everybody by surprise. Number one. Number two is that global community is also uh, not on the same page when it comes to condemning the Hamas. I mean, there are analysts who talk about that uh, on the one side, they can criticize Hamas for this much of killings, especially the innocent civilians. Number one. Number two is it must have taken a long planning for Hamas to conduct such a massive attack. Why do you see the domestic politics and the factors that come in order to contribute to this sort of negligence on the part of the Israeli forces or the intelligence agencies? Where do you look all this thing, coming and contributing to this entire, discourse on why shouldn't a state like Israel be prepared to such a massive attack? How is the domestic politics playing into this?
See, when it comes to the domestic politics, absolutely that there is no doubt about it that Israel was found unaware, and there is a massive intelligence failure. This is important to note, mainly because Israeli government and Israeli parties, political parties which are currently in power, and the opposition parties, as well as the larger Israeli military and the larger society, was engaged in completely in domestic politics, in the sense that if student of Israel always, when as a student of Israel, we always learn that security and defense is of paramount importance. But at this point of time, somehow the government, which is one of the most right-wing governments in Israel in its history, was more focused on domestic issues, in the sense that it was focused on judicial reforms. And there were protests going on for the last year or so against such reforms. There were also, Israeli Defense Forces reservists who had refused to join the forces because of this. And also, the Israeli right-wing government was more focused on West Bank than Gaza Strip, and that was mainly because the right-wing government in Israel is more interested in the interest of the settler community in the West Bank. So, because of all these factors, somehow Israel did not anticipate such a large-scale action, military action against it from Gaza Strip and from Hamas, because they also were not fully aware of the preparedness and the capacity of Hamas. So many of these aspects would be analyzed within Israel also, as far as I know. Domestic political aspects, the military aspects will be analyzed. The process has already started, and it will have far-reaching repercussions in domestic politics as far as Israel is concerned, both militarily as well as from the point of view of political issues. That is one part of this. The second part is about the global community and the regional powers. And why did they completely ignore the Palestinian issue? Why did they completely ignore the potency of Hamas? That is something which is important to discuss. It is currently being discussed. Can there be a normalization of relations between Arab countries and Israel without taking into account the Palestinian issue? Whether it is for the regional countries or for mediators like the United States and other European countries, China, and other powers who are interested in the region, including India. And if you look at it, most countries have maintained this point that there has to be a two-state solution to this conflict. But if one looks at action on the ground, it has not really been towards a two-state solution. So that is, I think, that point also requires some degree of analysis, both in Israel and in the regional countries, as well as the outside external powers. And with therein, I would also bring the point about, there has been discussions about how countries, this will disrupt the normalization process vis-a-vis Israel. We have to wait and watch. But from my point of view, there are two very, very early and primary conclusions which I will derive from this. The first is that there is no the untenability of a status quo as far as the Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories are concerned. So there has to be some way to find a diplomatic political solution to the Palestinian issue, without which the world cannot completely put a blind eye to it. That is one point. The second point is that Hamas's indulgence in terrorist activities is not going to help the Palestinian cause at all. At what cost? I mean, one has to also look at the cost. The number of Palestinian people who have already lost their lives in the Israeli retaliation, which is ongoing, and one doesn't know when it will end. And imagine, just because Hamas attacked Israel and led to such a number of deaths in Israel, This has led to a situation where there would be a ground incursion. Israel is already preparing for a ground incursion and has already asked people to leave northern Gaza. Gaza is already in a bad humanitarian situation for a very long time. This will perpetuate the humanitarian situation and lead to a further, uh, pain and further dislocation and further death for the Palestinian people. So Hamas's action also has to be seen within the context of at what cost are you trying to, arrive at some kind of tactical, basically a tactical, goal of, making this into a prominent issue in the regional conflict, regional issue, and the international arena.
When we talk about the element of modern warfare, Israeli security forces were taken by surprise by the different ways and modes that Hamas attacked with, be that paragliding, be that the missiles that were launched towards the land of Israel, and then the killings. This time around, it seemed that the target was not, it was not so pick and choose, like targeting the security forces would have been a different thing. But the killings, the innocent killings that resulted out of this massive attack, this war or attack of this scale needed a planning, a long-term planning that they must have done. uh, why do you see that this entire I mean, see the Gaza Strip, if we look geographically at it, it's cut off from almost all the countries that they have land borders with. There is not no country like that. There is a desert in the south of it, and then a Mediterranean coast on the other side of it, and also Israel in the north and the northeast. But the attack of this massive scale, I mean, this was just massive, massive enough that nobody even. I mean, go across the Twitter, go across the social media, and see the videos released by Hamas itself and their social media unit. It seems that the preparations were being made since for a long time. I mean, this modern warfare and its impact on the region, and apart from that, also its impact on the conflict regions across the world, would be like, all the analysts will be keeping an eye closely on that.
True. When it comes to the, if one has to analyze it from the point of view of modern warfare, there are 2 points that needs to be considered first. One is yes, the nature of warfare has changed. It's no longer about two militaries engaging in combat face to face, as it used to happen during Second World War and in, other wars that uh, kind of followed in the 20th century. So the nature of modern warfare has changed drastically over the last 2, 3 decades. I would say beginning from the 1991 Kuwait crisis, which was the first televised war where you are not only engaging in combat but also engaging in propaganda through warfare. So, and then one also has to understand that it is also an urban warfare. So in urban warfare, uh, the casualty among civilians are in many cases likely to be high. For example, as it is happening in the case of Ukraine and Russia, there is a high casualty level and displacement level as far as civilians are concerned because it is urban warfare. So if one looks at it from that point of view, yes, it's a modern warfare where the enemy has been taken by surprise, and there is a degree of casualty, high casualty at the level of the civilians. But there is a second point also, and that is that if one looks at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, uh, the warfare have largely been currently confined to actions which are predictable, which means that both Israel and Hamas have indulged in military actions in a predictable manner. that unpredictability of warfare, which is a very very normal, you know, tactics of warfare. That is unpredictability. That is no, that was not being engaged between Hamas and Israel for a long time. So, in that sense, there was a change. Hamas indulged in an unpredictable action, both in terms of the timing and nature of the attack, as well as the scale of that. And both of this took Israel by surprise, leading to a current situation. So, if one looks at it from the point of view of modern warfare, yes, it is certainly can be considered as a modern warfare, but still there has to be a degree of, and that degree of unpredictability is fine, but there has to be a degree of uh, you know uh, uh, there are also laws for war, for engaging in war, where you do not intentionally target unarmed civilians, children, elderly people, people who are engaging in religious activities, who are completely, unarmed. So, if if Israel is doing any such crime, any such action, that doesn't justify Hamas's action, and Israel has been held into account for any such activity through the legal processes, through media analysis, through academics, and through other processes. So, in the same way, if Hamas is engaging in modern warfare, it has to first tell that it is engaging in modern warfare. Secondly, if even if it is indulging in unpredictable warfare, in a surprise attack, that does not give you the license to attack, target, intentionally kill people and take hostages. People have also been taken hostage, children, women, elderly people, for exchange, for future negotiations, so that they can be negotiated as prisoner of war. I mean, Israel also holds a large number of Palestinians as prisoners of war. So basically, these are tactics which raises questions on Hamas's, intentions, whether it can be only seen as a tactics of warfare, or these tactics are basically very similar to what Al Qaeda used to do in earlier times, the Islamic State has done in Iraq and Syria, and many other such organizations which indulge in activities as such in the name of Islam, or in the name of jihad, or in any other, name or cause. So even if you're saying, if one says that the cause justifies the means, there has to be some degree of adherence to international law. There has to be some degree of adherence to laws of warfare as well. So in all these parameters, if one puts Hamas's action, there is no way it can be justified.
When we talk about the impact of this attack on the region itself, when we talk of West Asia or Middle East, protests have been, registered quite last few days now, and the region that most of the analysts concluded a week before that this region is now, negotiating with the normalizing relations with Israel, be that Saudi Israel relations, be that so the UAE, Israel UAE relations, so to speak. Uh, Most of the analysts also, see this from a different perspective of barring any sort of normalizing ties with countries like Saudi Arabia, and even out of the pressure that Mohammed bin Salman has to just get out of the negotiations and the deal they were actually about to sign, normalizing relations with Israel last, a few days back. Apart from that, also some analysts would see the hand of Iran in barring this, negotiations between these countries taking place. How realistic is that?
Look, when it comes to the regional situation, first of all, one has to understand, then when it comes to the larger public in the region, the Arab street, the people in Iran, the people in Turkey, and in the larger world also, there is a significant sympathy for Palestinian cause, and that is something which is fine, which is important. I mean, people look at it as a, as people who have been struggling for their own state, their own freedom, their own cause for a very long time, and they have not been able to achieve it for a variety of reasons, and hence there is a significant sympathy for it. There is also the Islamic angle where people see this as a war between Islam and Judaism, for land or for religious places and so on. So, and there is a degree of component of truth in that, and that is why there is a larger sympathy among the people in the West Asia region, vis-a-vis Palestine, vis-a-vis Hamas also. But there is also has to be understood from the point of view of states. When it comes to the regional states, there is a growing realization, recognition among regional states that the about the tenability of this conflict, in the sense that can this conflict be sustained for another 50, 60, 100 years? Is that possible? Is that tenable? And this recognition is very much there among Arab countries, among many other countries, even Israel. There is a degree of understanding that one has to find a way to resolve this conflict eventually, by diplomatic process, by political process, or by any other process. And that is why once witnessed that US kind of tried under Trump to have this deal of the century. Obviously, it was poorly planned and executed, which it did not really take off. Eventually led to the Abraham Accords, where some of the Gulf countries and then Morocco and Sudan normalized relations with Israel. Then it followed with some other processes, and there were discussions about Saudi Arabia and Israel engaging in mediated, US mediated talks, negotiations to normalize relations. So after this, eruption of war between Hamas and Israel, I would say that the Saudi-Israel normalization talks formally also has ended. Saudi Arabia has said so. But this is, in my view, a temporary setback. And why I call it as a temporary setback is people might disagree. There are people who have said that it is the end of the normalization process. But I would call it as a temporary setback because Saudi Arabia, the sacred talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel, security and political engagement, predates Abraham Accords, and it will continue even after the normalized process. I mean, this war comes to an end. Obviously, it will become more difficult for Saudi Arabia. It will, as well as for Israel, and both of them will have to take the Palestinian view into account, without which it would not be possible to move forward. So, in that sense, this one of important development. But the other factors which had led these countries to normalization at the first place, that is geoeconomic factors and geopolitical factors, both remain true. And if one looks at that from that point of view, it is likely to eventually resume once this current phase of war comes to an end. Now, from the Iranian point of view, Iran is the only country in the region today which takes a very, very strong position against Israel, which has proxies such as Hezbollah, armed proxies, including Hamas. Hamas is one of the proxies, even though it's not exactly the way Hezbollah is, but it acts like a proxy. So Hamas, Hezbollah, and militant organizations in Iraq and then in Yemen, all of them are in a way Iranian proxies, and Iran and Israel have been engaged in a proxy war of sort in Syria and Iraq. So, from the Iranian point of view, one can say that this was a tactical, success, that it was able to prevent or bring the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the fore. But in the long term, the conflict is not untenable, the status quo is not untenable, is is no longer tenable, which means that all countries in the region, if they want to live in peace, if they want to live in a stable environment, if they want to ensure their own security, they will have to come to terms with the existence of other countries. So there is no way countries like Iran can push Israel away by any means. Organizations like Hamas cannot simply wish Israel away and think of Palestine from river to the sea. These kind of approaches are basically problematic. There has to be a larger process within the region for reconciliation, and that is something which is what Abraham Accords and the Saudi-Israel normalization were part of, and eventually they will resume.
One last thing, then we'll wrap it up, is two things that I want to know in the conclusion of this podcast is what about the future politics? What about the future of Benjamin Netanyahu? That if I quote Haaretz, it's people are questioning his credibility as the prime minister of the country. Number one. Number two is the larger regional geopolitics. Where do you see it going from this point where Hamas is attacked and there is not yet a normalization between these two, between Israel and Palestine, any which way happening in any time near future. These two things need to be addressed before we can sign off.
From the point of view of Israel's domestic politics, one thing is, I mean, it will take a long time to actually decipher what happens next. But one thing is very clear: Netanyahu Netanyahu's political career has come to an end. He will not be back as prime minister or as a leader of Likud or even leader of the right wing coalition in the future. Currently, he is on the, I would say, a borrowed time as far as his political career is concerned, because there is a very strong anger against Netanyahu, both in the left and the right. The left was already angry. The left and liberal groups were already angry because of his activities and actions. He is accused of, is currently, facing trials in court for corruption charges, however minuscule they might be. And then the right will question the abject failure of the government in preventing the loss of Israeli lives. So, if one looks at all three, and then I'll go back, compare it to what happened in 1973. Golda Meir was the prime minister at that time. And even though she immediately continued and even won the 1973 elections, the next elections, next Knesset elections, he actually her political career ended because of the 1973 war. So, in the same manner, I would say that Netanyahu's political career has come to an end. What will happen in terms of whether the right wing government will be formed or a left coalition will come or a centrist coalition will come? What happens? We'll have to wait and watch and see what happens. As far as the regional geopolitics is concerned, as I said, in my view, there is a greater need today to take the Palestinian issue into account. At the same time, organizations like Hamas and their position cannot be, justified in any ways, because they call for, they question the existence of Israel as a state, and this is no longer possible because Israel is a reality. It's homeland for Jewish people, and they have the right to have their own homeland. And this is now recognized by the entire world, by the regional countries as well. Now, if one looks at the larger geopolitical process in the region, this was largely forced by the changing geopolitics in the world, which means that the inability of the United States to remain focused in the region. So, and because its focus is getting expanded to China, to other parts, to Europe and Indo-Pacific, and so on. So it cannot remain completely focused on the Middle East. That one part. The second part is also the need for greater economic interdependence, partnership among the regional countries, because of, see, all the Gulf countries are preparing for a post-oil economy. 2 decades, 3 decades onwards, oil will no longer remain the most important global commodity, which means that they have to prepare for a post-oil economy, and they are doing it. That will not happen in isolation. That has to happen through economic interdependence. And then other countries also have to come out of their economic miseries. Whether it is Egypt, whether it is Turkey, whether it is Israel, they have to break the shackles of living in silos, including Iran. So until unless there is a greater economic integration in the region, there is no way, you can face the future. What has happened is people were trying to move towards economic integration while leaving the conflict aside, thinking that it will solve itself in the process. That was a mistake. And now the states, the regional states, the external states will have to take these issues into account, the conflict into account, while moving forward towards a geo-economic process and regional integration.
Dr. Kama, thank you so much for joining us on this very important podcast. I'll sign it off from here. I'll be seeing you the other time, anytime soon, I guess a week or 2 weeks after, once we'll see the developments taking place, whatever the conclusion the region actually witnesses. We'll be talking about that anytime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.